Why stretch watercolor paper? In this video, I'm going to give you 7 really important reasons why you should always stretch your paper. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle. On my channel, you're going to find art tips, art techniques, and also business advice and social media training for artists. So do please subscribe, and if you click the bell notification, you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. So maybe you've never bothered to stretch your watercolor paper or just haven't learned how to do it. In this video, I'm going to give you 7 reasons why it's really important to do, and at the end of the video I'll link to my other video which will show you exactly how to do it quickly and easily. So reason number 1 why you should always stretch your watercolor paper is it's simply the best surface to work on. You might have seen watercolor blocks which are gummed around the edge. Now, it's a common misconception that that is stretched paper. The paper on those blocks is not stretched, it's simply gummed around the edge to stick the sheet down. What this means is that the sheet can't curl up while you're working on it, which is a definite advantage over unstretched paper. So if you're never going to stretch your paper, that's your next best option. But absolutely nothing compares to stretched paper. It's just the best surface to work on. I've got a piece here stretched onto board. So look how lovely that is, all ready to go. Whether you're working on watercolor, whether you're working in gouache, acrylics on paper, or perhaps you're doing collage, it's absolutely the easiest and the surface that dries looking the best. So reason number 2 why you should always stretch your watercolor paper is it's really quick and easy. So we've already discovered it's the best surface to work on, so why wouldn't you stretch your paper? Probably because there's a load of people on the internet telling you that it's complex, difficult, expensive, time consuming. None of these things are true. There's a really quick and easy way of doing it. I was taught it by a botanical artist. I never looked for anything harder because why would I? I can stretch a piece of paper quicker than you can make a cup of tea. So there are videos on YouTube that will tell you how to avoid stretching your watercolor paper. I watched one the other day and it was something like why I never stretch my watercolor paper, and the lady started out saying that the reason she never stretches her watercolor paper is basically she can't be bothered. There's no good reason not to stretch your watercolor paper. As I said, it's really quick and simple. I'm going to link to a video on how to do it at the end. Don't be worrying about these videos telling you not to do it. Don't be worrying about people telling you not to do it. The truth is they can't be bothered, and they have an idea, they conceive that it's a lot harder than it actually is. You might also have seen videos showing you how to flatten your paper out after you didn't stretch it in the first place. All these complex methods of spraying the back and stick it out. Why would you do any of that? In the time that you could take to watch all of that nonsense on the internet, you could have stretched about 5 sheets of paper. Reason number 3 for always stretching your watercolor paper is it actually improves your painting. Now, how is this even possible? Well, it's quite simple. If your paper buckles while you work on it, and it will still buckle even if you stretch it, but it will buckle while it's being used to a much lesser extent than unstretched paper. Now, if your painting buckles, what happens is you get this kind of effect. You know, the paper waves and dips, and what will happen is into those dips will sit your paint. Now, the paint that's outside of those dips will start to dry because there's less paint there. The paint that's in those dips or puddles will take longer to dry. Now, paint that's very wet, like the paint in the dips, is attracted to paint that's damp, like the paper on the bumps that's drying. Now, what happens then is you start getting back runs and drying marks and cauliflowers. So the more your paper buckles when you work on it, and it will still buckle a little bit if you stretch your paper, but much, much less than usual. The more your paper buckles when you work on it, the more you will get uneven drying times between areas of paint, and that's what causes a lot of back runs and cauliflowers and drying lines generally to appear on your paper. So reason number 4 for always stretching your watercolor paper is because it's going to save you money. So why is this? Because you'll often hear people who don't want to stretch their paper say, just work on this really, really heavy duty, heavyweight paper and you'll be fine. Well, the problem with that is, firstly, if you're going to throw tons and tons of water on it, like very big loose skies, I think you're going to find it still buckles slightly. Secondly, that kind of paper is really expensive. Now, when we talk about thin and thick watercolor paper, it's relative. You know, the paper is relative. If you're comparing it with something like cartridge paper, even thin watercolor paper is incredibly sturdy, incredibly resilient. It's all you need. You don't need to go to these very heavyweight papers. If you stretch your paper, they're much more expensive anyway. Now, the other reason it saves you money is because if you buy paper from an art shop in a pad, you're paying as much as 2, 3, even 4 times the price that you would buy it for if you're buying loose sheets on the internet in bulk. So what you can do is you can buy a full size of Imperial watercolour paper. I think it's something like 32 by 20 inches. It's huge anyway. Imperial is a big size. Luckily, the manufacturers, if you don't want some massive sheets of paper arriving at your house, I think the neighbours always wonder if I'm buying a wardrobe every week. But if you don't want that, most manufacturers will cut it down into what they call half Imperial or quarter Imperial. Now, if you're a beginner starting, you don't want massive, huge paper, then quarter Imperial is perfectly fine. If you want to do a little bit bigger, then you can go up to half Imperial. I buy full Imperial sheets and cut them down to all sorts of different sizes, and it's way cheaper buying those bulk sheets of loose paper than it is buying watercolour pads. Reason number 5 for stretching your paper is that it will always dry flat. Now, you might find that as you're working on it, it still bumps a little bit, but every time you stop working on it, and I tend to work on my paintings in stages, so I'll do a couple of hours, leave it to dry, another day do a couple of hours, leave it to dry. I've got lots of other business interests and lots of other things, and I'm not even in the studio every day. Sometimes I'm teaching and the work just sits there for ages. Now, every single time that I leave that paper alone, it'll go back to dead flat. And providing I let it dry completely before I take it off the board, I've got the most beautiful flat sheet of paper, even if I've thrown absolutely tons of water on it and put layer after layer and wash after wash. Now, once you get your work framed, this just adds something to it. It looks so much nicer. If I walk around a gallery and I see a watercolour painting on bumpy old paper, I'm not at all impressed, and I certainly wouldn't buy it. I don't know about you. Reason number 6 for stretching your watercolour paper is it gives you a lovely edge all the way around the painting that you can write on, both when you're using it, when you're painting on it, and after you've finished it and you're storing it. Now, why on earth would you write around the edges of your watercolour painting? Well, there's all sorts of things that you could put on there. You could put the date on there. Some of that tape is going to stay on the edges when you cut it off the board. This doesn't matter because if it's ever framed, it'll go behind the mount. So even when it's off the board, you've got room to write things on it. So once it's off the board, you might write the date that you did the painting, you might write the title. Because I'm a professional artist, I write reference numbers on mine, and I write the title on so that I can list them and I won't lose track of where they are. Now, the other thing you can do is you can write along the edges whilst you're working on them. So what might you write? You might write some notes about what you're doing. I actually write my colours down. This is really important because you might sort of mix a colour. We've all done it, and you thought, oh, I'll remember what colour I'm using tomorrow. You mix a green from a certain blue and a certain yellow, and you think, oh, I'll finish that tomorrow. I know what I'm doing with it. And then something happens, you know, the dog needs the vets, and then you've got to go and drive to your daughter's house. It all goes off, and before you know it, a week and a half has gone past. You look at that picture, and you have no clue what you mixed that green from. So I write down the colours that I'm using. It also allows me to work in a limited palette and not use too many different colours in one painting. And this is quite important in terms, particularly for landscapes, because you get that overall look that comes from mixing everything from a small selection of colours. So I put my colours on there. I'll even sometimes draw a little arrow sort of pointing towards the thing that I've mixed the colour from. So it's a really useful place to write things down. So reason number 7 for always stretching your watercolour paper is that when you finish your painting, it gives a lovely area at the top for your framer to attach a mount. So what can happen sometimes is you can paint right up to the edge of a picture, and then you find that you're going to lose a little bit of it when it gets framed. So I used to teach in an old people's home. There's a lovely lady there called Ethel, and sometimes I used to get things framed for her, and she'd say to me, "Oh, Michelle, can you frame this painting?" And she often used to draw sort of landscapes, particularly things with churches, and she would draw the church spire at the very top of the church, and she would finish this about 1 millimetre from the edge of her paper, which was not stretch paper, it was just on a pad. And I used to take it to my framers and say, "Could you frame this please?" And he's just pulling his hair out because he's got like 1 millimetre to attach that mount. The other option is to crop the painting. So this won't happen if you're working on stretch paper. There's always a good amount of room for you or the framer to attach your mount. If you're wondering what a mount is because you're in America, I'm talking about a mat. In the UK we call them mounts. In some countries they call them mats. So if I'm talking about mounting your work, I'm talking about matting your work too. So I hope this video has persuaded you to have a go at paper stretching if you haven't tried it before. If you've tried it before and not had good results, you've probably been using the wrong technique. So I've got a lovely video for you that will show you quickly and easily how to do it. You can watch it right now, it's here, and don't forget to subscribe.